Greetings and welcome to a special independent showcase episode of Morrowind Modding Showcases, and this week we're taking a look at the Symphony by Hedgehog12 and the Symphony Team. Now, first things first, I really need to apologise for the extensive lack of videos of late. This showcase took a lot longer to work on than expected, and to be honest, I was taking a little break from video recording there for a few days, and I've just been really tired of late. But let's just call that my summer hiatus and get back to work. So anyway, back to our current showcase here. There are a few things we need to cover before we can actually start showing off what this mod does exactly. First and foremost, this is not going to be a complete showcase. The Symphony essentially can be broken down into two components, a graphics replacer and a content mod. We're only going to be focusing on just the graphics replacer aspect today. I had originally intended to show off the new content the mod adds as well, but after some rather significant issues with trying to get everything to work on that front, I just had to give up. And it should be pointed out that most of the new quests and dialogue added by the Symphony's content mod expansion are still in Russian. And if you're interested, Hedgehog12 is looking for translators to help translate the mod into English. So if you're fluent in both Russian and English, you should definitely check out their forums. You'll find a link to that down in the description below. With all that said, let's get started, shall we? The Symphony is a pretty massive graphics mod, but it doesn't cover everything. Basically, it replaces all miscellaneous items, weapons, armor, light sources, books, creatures, ingredients, potions, and various other small items with new models and textures that have a fairly distinctive art style to them. That said, it doesn't cover landscape textures, architecture, finishings, or flora, hence why I'm using MGSO 3.0 as a base to go along with it here. And to start out with, I thought it might be a good idea to show you guys some environments with the Symphony installed, so you can kind of see how things look a little different than they did before. And what better place to start off than with the ship you arrive in. And you can also see the Census and Excise offices here. And you'll notice I'm basically just following Morrowind's startup introduction here, since everyone has played through this section at least once, and you should be able to note the visual differences pretty well right here. And you should notice that the architecture and furnishings have largely remained the same from the MGSO 3.0 version of Morrowind, and I don't believe the Symphony covers any furnishings or containers, but I could be wrong. But again, all the clutter and detailing is pretty much all new in here. I mean, not all new as in new objects, but the replaces added by the Symphony sort of give the appearance that these are sort of new objects that you're seeing for the first time. Which is a really cool effect in my opinion, especially if you've been playing the game for 14 years now like I have. A lot of the objects on the shelves in here look, kind of new and mysterious, obviously with a lot of differences from their vanilla Morrowind counterparts, though other objects like the famous limeware platter still bear some similarities. You'll also notice that a lot of object names have been changed, like bottles might be called cloth-covered bottles or chitin bottles, instead of, the generic bottle names of vanilla Morrowind. And you also find pretty much every book and text object has gotten new book covers as well. In addition, torches have been replaced with a sort of Doomer-style torch, and a lot of the ingredients that you'll find in containers have gotten new icons and also new names, which does kind of add to confusion a bit, but just goes to make the game feel all new again, with a lot of that, sense of mystery that encourages exploration. Now, I kind of wanted to take a look around outside real quick, and as I've already mentioned before, you'll notice that there's really nothing added to the landscape architecture or floor textures or models, but what you will notice right away is the changes in the armor that the guards are wearing. All of the armor in Morrowind and Tribunal have been completely replaced with new models that are obviously, again, vastly different from vanilla Morrowind. And one last interior I wanted to take a look at here and see the name is the Trade House, because again, this is one you'll all be familiar with to at least some degree, and I'll give you guys a bit of an idea of some of the overall changes made by this massive graphic compilation. All of the light sources in here have again been remodeled, though in the case of most of these common Imperial style candles, they look fairly similar to vanilla Morrowind's counterparts, so obviously with better models. And upstairs we can see some more Imperial armor, and something I'll note here, and something we'll look at more later on in this video, is that the Symphony includes a lot of really interesting shield designs, and also includes some new additions in terms of new types of Imperial armor that really give Imperial soldiers a rather diverse look depending on their rank. Now, before we start moving on to a few different locations, I wanted to show off the interior of one of the ships in Ebonheart, where you can get a pretty good idea of the sort of atmosphere you can expect to find in the Symphony. Obviously, the hold here is pretty dark, but notice the cool lighting effects from the lamps in here, and of course the unique looking armor of the gods, and all the random objects just strewn about everywhere. With the Symphony, you can expect to find a lot of environments like this, which just sort of feel completely new and different from vanilla Morrowind. And I know I'm going to be using that term a lot in this video, just bear with me. There's only so many ways to describe how the Symphony changes the appearance and atmosphere of Morrowind. And moving on, we're going to take a look at some interiors from each architectural style present around Vardenfell, the Symphony install, to just sort of show off how these new objects and places look in different environments. Since I imagine you guys might be curious what this all looks like in the rest of the game before you go installing a multi-gigabyte graphics overhaul. That said, if you want to skip ahead to another section where we look at the just places, you'll find an annotation to the main menu over in the corner somewhere. With that out of the way, the first location we're visiting is the Maddock Trade House for our Rotorin style environment, where you can see all these graphical changes pretty clearly amongst the Rotorin architecture here. Most notable is the light sources once again, and of course you can see yet more of the Imperial style armor from the troops hanging around the tavern here. Again, there's quite a few different styles of this armor. Some are all new that have been added in by the Symphony, and others are replaces. And you also notice a lot of changes with the bottles and dishwares and many of the other just miscellaneous objects in here. And you'll also notice these really cool light sources down here in the Imperial Legion area, where you'll start the Imperial Legion questline. Some of these lamps look especially nice with their stained glass, and they're just really cool looking. And next up we have the South Wall Corner Club in Balmora for our Halali interior, and the lighting in here is, I think, just a bit different before, a bit more green possibly. You also just saw some chitin armor being worn by our Khajiit upstairs, and it's been given a pretty major overhaul, and we'll be looking at that in more detail during our armor segment. Other than that though, there's not a whole lot else to say really. Obviously the bottles, cups, goblets, tankards, and all the traditional tavern detailing have changed considerably by these replaces, and at least in my opinion, they look pretty good in this environment. And real quick, I did want to take a quick look at the Telvanni Marketplace, since this is one of the only outdoor areas where you'll see a lot of the clutter objects that have been replaced by the Symphony, so you can get an idea of what this all looks like in an outdoor environment. And moving on, we're going to take a quick look at the Gateway Inn inside of Mora. Since this is yet another tavern, the biggest changes are again going to be to the various dishware clutter you see strewn about on the tables, counters, and shelves here, only with a Telvanni background instead of a Rotorin or Halali one. Still, it's important to showcase these different environments so you know what to expect when you play through the Symphony for yourself, and you actually find some of the objects have been, given Telvanni names for their Telvanni designs. Like there's a Telvanni style jug on one of the shelves in here, and in some homes you can find Telvanni pots and bottles with different artistic designs. And for our next stop, I thought it would be a good idea to take a look at some of the Ashlander camps with these new graphical changes. And you're not going to notice a whole lot on the exterior, aside from the occasional Ashlander wearing chitin armor again. But notice the light sources in the central area here, and there's also some fairly different particle effects going on with the fire pits. And here you can see the inside of one of the Ashlander tents, and something I just really want to point out here is that the Ashlander lamps actually have fireflies in them, which is a really cool and nice little addition to detailing there. I mean, I can just imagine Ashlanders going out and capturing these little fireflies to provide interior lighting for their yurts, which is just a cool design and fits in with Morrowind rather well, I think. And here's another Ashlander yurt. This one belongs to a wise woman, and you can see a lot of different ingredients and sort of different miscellaneous items being cluttered around in here that just, sort of give you an idea of what some of this stuff looks like. And the very last place we're going to take a look at in this section of the showcase is the Black Shark Corner Club in Vivek, with a Velothi-styled interior environment. And yes, I know, it's another tavern. As it so happens, we're showcasing a graphics mod that mostly replaces clutter. Taverns are really the best interiors to showcase due to the amount of clutter one finds in them. And regardless, you can see a lot of different candle and lamp styles in here, some of which have some really interesting designs to them, and a few of the NPCs are wearing some of the new armor replaces, so there's a few different things to notice in here. I don't know if I mentioned it before, but all potions and booze-related items have also been replaced in the Symphony, and we'll be going into more detail of that later on. And real quick, I just wanted to point out this candle here, which you can see sort of has flames that are being fed by fire salts, which is just a really neat little detail. And sort of going from just looking at various interiors to actually getting a rather detailed look at all of these replaces, I've gathered just about every miscellaneous item I could find in this one room, so you guys could, see how different everything is altogether. Again, a lot of these objects are, kind of similar to their vanilla Morrowind counterparts, but a lot of them have been completely redesigned, such as the silverware pitcher, or some of these vases and pots, and, overall, a lot of this stuff does sort of have a Russian artistic style about it that reminds me of some European RPGs, like Risen or Gothic, but a lot of this stuff is just, pretty unique, with an art design that's, partially inspired by Morrowind's weird aesthetics. It also includes everything from sword gems to repair hammers, lockpicks, probes, buckets, pillows, limeware items, which have been renamed to obsidianware items, and of course Dwemer items have also gotten a makeover as well, with gears, tubes, and the numerous Dwemer dishware coming in some new and vastly different sizes. Most of these replaces have a lot of detail to them that make them a fine addition to collect and put on display. And they're obviously high quality models and textures, as you should expect from Hedgehog 12, who has released a number of high quality replaces in the past. And they just really all look pretty beautiful together too as well. And before we move on, I wanted to show you guys a bigger breakdown of the new art for the game's icons. Pretty much every weapon, piece of armor, most rings and amulets, potions, ingredients, books, scrolls, and just about everything else you can imagine have been given new icons with cool new art. And something I especially want to point out here are the icons for the potions. Now you'll find a small icon as part of the icon, an icon within an icon if you will, or iconception, and these icons include tiny Daedric marks coloured in blue or green or purple or red or grey, and this helps you figure out which potion does what. The colours signify the school of magic the potion belongs to, and the Daedric symbols, I believe, indicate what it does. Blue is for restoration, red is for destruction, purple for mysticism, green for illusion, and this is just, a cool and easy way to visually organise your inventory without having to always hover over each icon for more information. Likewise, scrolls have been given the same treatment so you can more easily find the scrolls you're looking for, and you also find new icons for ingredients, keys, and just about everything else, pretty much every miscellaneous item, and really just about every object in the game outside of just regular clothes, like I believe shirts, robes, and shoes all have the same vanilla icons as before, but everything else has been completely changed. And next up, we're going to take a look at a few more items, specifically alchemical items, since these have had arguably the biggest overhaul with the Symphony graphic replaces. Take a look at the alchemical apparatuses here. Most of them look vastly different from their vanilla Morrowind counterparts, and you can tell quite distinctly the differences between apprentice and journeyman quality and master and grandmaster quality, which is a pretty big deal since before apprentice and journeyman looked pretty similar, to be honest. And you'll also notice that some of the equipment utilizes ingredients like fire salts for providing a heat source, a rather nice little addition and detail. Taking a look at some bottles next, I've included a large array of alchemical potions of just about every quality, as well as bottles of booze on display on this table here, and again, as with the icons, something you'll quickly notice is that not every bottle of the same quality looks exactly the same. Many have different coloured markings on them, and that serves to indicate what kind of function they serve, like bottles with a blue marking indicate restoration, purple for mysticism, and so on and so forth. Basically, this means there's a unique model, not just for each quality of potion, but for each school of potion as well. And taking a closer look here, there's really quite a lot of detail on some of these bottles. They overall look pretty fantastic, I gotta say, though there are clearly a few that are of a slightly lower resolution than others. But still, there's a much larger variety of potion models than what you'll find in vanilla Morrowind, and, that's definitely a plus, and, it's just a lot easier to organise these as well, and if you're like me and you like to have a lot of potions just decorating your houses in Morrowind, this is certainly definitely a cool feature to have. And of course, since we're taking a look at alchemy items, that means we should take a look at a few ingredients as well. I've lined up a number of ingredients that can be found in the base game and Tribunal along these shelves here, and they've all been replaced with new models and textures with the Symphony. A few of them, like the ectoplasm, even have some animated features, with the ectoplasm, sort of bubbling up now and then. Naturally, these are fairly high quality replaces, and many of these models are vastly different from the vanilla Morrowind counterparts. And the flowers especially look pretty cool in my estimation, like the stone flowers and heather have some really striking models and would make for some lovely house decorations. Likewise, rubies, diamonds, and emeralds are pretty scenic with reflective surfaces that give them a unique quality. And then there's Daedra Hearts, and this is quite probably one of the more unique replaces in the Symphony. The Daedra Heart is actually beating, seemingly still pumping blood, though not connected to anything. It's a really cool feature, if also a bit creepy, and, no Mage's Lab is complete without at least one of these beating hearts on the shelves. I mean, after all, mages and magicians, typically have a heart of some kind depicted in a jar somewhere in their alchemical labs, and, this just, helps you live the dream, so to speak. There's also a bunch of other ingredients down here, including human meat, which now has a unique model and isn't just a copy of hound meat. You'll also find coat of flowers, rubies, corpus wheat beans. Pretty much every ingredient you can think of has been given a new model. And for our next segment, we're going to be looking at a few dungeons, and more specifically the slight changes that the Symphony makes to them, including replaces for all existing creatures. To start out with, we're taking a look at a set of Velothi-style tombs. And the first thing you'll notice here is that the night sconces look a little different now, and perhaps just a bit creepier. And it's certainly quite dark down here. And next you'll notice our first undead encounter, an ancestor ghost, and these look quite different from before, and when they die, they actually leave a puddle of ectoplasm on the ground. A big change from the dying remains in vanilla Morrowind. You also occasionally find creatures that are already dead in tombs and other dungeons now. The Symphony adds these corpse creatures to the level list to add a bit of variety to the encounters you might come across. And moving on, the second undead in here is a skeleton archer. Again with an all-new model and a new death animation as well. Instead of just falling down like skeletons in vanilla Morrowind, these skeletons will actually, collapse into a pile of broken bones. A nice little addition that adds a bit of variety to the enemies you encounter. And here you can see another one of Morrowind's undead creatures with a slightly updated new look. This time the dreaded Greater Bone Walker that everyone hates. I mean, that draining strength spell is really quite annoying, and unfortunately I think it's still there. But anyway, you can see that it's pretty much still as ugly as before, with lots of torn flesh, but it also has some nice little details, like a rather creepy looking eyeball poking out of its sockets. And moving on, here you can see another skeleton, this time a skeleton champion, and all skeletons now have at least, some armor on them. This fellow seems to have some sort of iron or steel armor that he's wearing, and he's also wielding a claymore. And in the background, you can see a Bone Lord, which now has some really kind of demonic red eyes glaring out at you. I'm not even sure if they're exactly a red coloring, but they're certainly very glowy and have lots of particle effects, which is kind of a nice feature. And Bone Lords have been largely overhauled, not just in appearance, but also in attacks. They can now summon ancestor ghosts and use weapons like any normal skeleton, but with the same shield spells used by vanilla Morrowind Bone Lords. And not only that, but when you kill a Bone Lord, they don't just die, they become an ancestor-like ghost spirit to attack you, practically invisible except for those, again, demonic red eyes. Needless to say, a lot of creatures in Morrowind's dungeons will be a lot tougher to fight with the Symphony. Not only might they respawn like this fellow, but they also largely seem to have larger health pools with a lot more hit points, and they definitely take a lot more swings with the sword to take down, or at least it seems that way. The next dungeon we'll be looking at is a Dwemer dungeon, and as you can tell, it's pretty dark in here. I don't know if that has anything to do with the Symphony in particular, or really, I mean, every time I install MGSO, I swear it makes the interiors unnaturally dark. But this lighting seems even dimmer than usual, but regardless, the Dwemer electric lights have obviously gotten a replacer, though they're pretty similar to the vanilla version. And you can also see a Centurion spider here, and these have been given pretty much a complete makeover. Now they're a bit more, sort of spiderish, with that, what looks like fangs or possibly mandibles. And they also have a bit of a different coloring compared to the rest of the Dwemer textures in here, a bit darker overall, and I know we already showed off a lot of the Dwemer clutter earlier, but here you can see a few more Dwemer objects, cluttering the environment in this room, including cogs, a schematic, and, all of these now have new models and textures, as you might expect, and the Symphony really just covers a lot of objects in general, and it's really quite fascinating to sort of compare some of this stuff to what you'll find in vanilla Morrowind, especially the goblets and tankards. And sort of moving down into the lower levels of this Dwemer dungeon, we can see a Steam Centurion, and something I should really note here is that much like the undead creatures we saw in the Velothi tombs, Dwemer Centurions tend to be a lot more challenging than they were in vanilla Morrowind. The Spear Centurion, for example, has a lot more health now and can also take a pretty long beating before dying, and it's also equipped with healing spells, which makes killing them that much more difficult. And other than that, the big change with Spear Centurions is mostly the textures and coloring. Overall, they have the same, shape and look as vanilla Morrowind, but again with darker coloring. And finally, we're going to take a look at some Daedric ruins, and this is probably the biggest part of our dungeon segment here, since Daedric ruins play such a prominent part in Morrowind's landscape, and there's quite a few different Daedra out there. We're going to start out with some exterior ruins, and we just saw a Frost Atronach just hanging around, and these have been given a massive overhaul with the Symphony instead of the Frost Giants they were before. Frost Atronachs are now sort of ghostly figures, hovering over the ground, leaving a trail of ice and snow in the air. In comparison, Clanfers, which we also just saw, they stick pretty much to the original versions of vanilla Morrowind. And here we can see a few, or at least one scamp anyway, and, they've gone over a fairly interesting overhaul. Obviously, they're high-quality mortals, and you'll notice actually that the ears sort of flop around a bit when they're moving around or getting attacked, and they also now use weapons and shields, which is a big change from vanilla Morrowind when they sort of just attacked you with their claws. And to be honest, these scamps actually look kind of, funny, swinging their swords every which way. They have a very expressive way of sword fighting. And going on into the interior of this Daedric shrine here, the most notable changes are again the light sources. And those actually haven't seen that big of a change really, just, more particle effects. And of course the Symphony doesn't really change a whole lot with the humanoid opponents you'll like to face in a Daedric shrine, outside of, their armor that is. But for some of the really big changes here, you can see a Dremora, or rather a summoned Dremora, with Daedric armor, and this is actually one of the really big changes that the Symphony changes with respect to Daedra. Dremora Lords can now summon other Daedra, such as a Dremora minion, or another creature like the Hungar here. And this makes any battle of a Dremora Lord a fairly epic affair, and you actually want to be a really high level before facing one. It should also be pointed out that all Daedra now have weapon resistance as well, and you can't just kill them with any old sword. And you can get a closer look at the Dremora Lord here, which includes big horns, grey hair, and of course a suit of Daedric armor. And next up we have a Flame Atronach, and these guys retain some of their same design from vanilla Morrowind, but they obviously have a lot more particle effects now, and they also appear to be wearing some sort of ethereal robe that waves around dramatically when they move or attack. And speaking of attacks, they have basically the same fireball attack, but when they die, their death animation is actually a lot different now. They fall into a pile of fire crystals instead of, just the generic Morrowind death scene where they just fall backwards, which is what usually happens. Here you can see those fire crystals up close, and next up we also have a Storm Atronach, and these guys have probably undergone the biggest change out of any of the Daedra creatures we've looked at in the Symphony. I mean, besides the particle effects galore show, they're basically balls of lightning with ethereal crystal forms and what looks like some sort of weapon that they're sort of holding in their hands there. I actually really like this look for the Storm Atronachs. It really gives them a lot of character, and the lightning flashes are a nice touch. Alright, we've covered a lot of stuff today, but now we're sort of moving into the meat of the Symphony's graphical enhancements, namely armor replaces. The Symphony replaces every armor set in the game, and more than that, it also adds a ton of new armor sets as well, which we won't be going into much detail with today. Right now we're just going to focus primarily on replaces, and one or two new armor sets as well. And in any event, I thought we'd start out by looking at some random armor sets being worn by NPCs out in the environment first. And we just saw the Nordic Fur armor, and this character here is wearing Duma armor. Each armor set has been completely overhauled to look graphically quite different from before, but usually in keeping with the style of the armor set. Like the Nordic Fur armor had a lot of obvious fur in the design, and it looked like something you might see in Skyrim, which is appropriate really. And here you can see what I believe is Orcish armor, and this presents a good opportunity to point something out. Nearly every armor set replaced or added in by the Symphony also includes weapon sheaths, such as a sword sheath at the hilt, or visible weapons on the back of your character, such as warhammers or war axes or war what have yous. And this is just a really cool immersion edition. Even if the weapons don't really match up exactly with what you have in your inventory, it's still a really nice feature to have. And in any event, here you can see my character wearing Netch leather armor, which is a fairly basic armor set, nothing too outlandish about the look or style here. It obviously looks a lot better than the vanilla version, and as always for the armor sets made by Hedgehog 12, they look really good, and Sort of moving on real quick, you can see some Telvanni God armor here, including the really neat feature of actual Telvanni banners attached to the backs, which, give each god a rather unique appearance. And seems perfectly fitting with Morrowind's art style. And this next armor set we're looking at right now is a sort of new armor set, I believe. It's kind of hard to tell, but it's an Imperial Legion style armor set with a bronze quality. Next up we have a set of steel armor, and the Symphony actually adds a few new helms and shields to this armor set, I believe. At least I don't think steel armor had 3 different styles of helms before. But in any event, the steel armor set is a bit more of a traditional sort of medieval knight armor set with the Symphony's graphic replaces. And I've also set up a large number of different armor sets with mannequins here to more easily show them off. And the first one we're looking at is the Enduro armor set, and know that robe you see isn't actually a separate clothing piece, that's actually a part of the armor's chest piece. So every Enduro god basically has a robe now, but it still looks good obviously. And across over here we have Ebony armor, which is another armor set that basically has a sort of knighthood look to it, with a lot of gold trim to add a bit of contrast to the darker ebony bits of the armor. And overall it looks really good, and here we have a full Daedric armor set which looks quite possibly more evil and menacing than the version found in vanilla Morrowind, with lots of red and black to make for an overall terrifying appearance. And if you want your enemies to flee in terror, that is definitely a good armor set to choose. Sort of adding a pretty big contrast to the dark and scary Daedric armor here, we have some bone mold armor with some custom Redoran style armor included, such as a Redoran tower shield that includes the Sigil of the Great House. And moving on, here you can see another one of the many different types of Imperial Legion armor, including a number of different shields, all of which have some really cool and unique designs to them. And you just gotta appreciate the high quality of these models. All these armor pieces look really fantastic, and they certainly help to add a bit of variety to the Imperial Legion ranks. I mean, we didn't really look at any forts in this episode, but if we had, you would have noticed a pretty wide array of Imperial Legion armor types in use, often corresponding to particular class or ranks of soldiers. There's also some more Nordic fur armor over here in the corner, and we pretty much covered that already, but it's still a really good looking armor design nonetheless. It's very distinctive. And here we have some chitin armor, again very distinctive looking and characteristic of the Dunmiri culture. You also notice the armor set includes a club at the hilt, and not shown here, but there's also a chitin sword and a bow attached to the back, and right next door we have some bone mold armor, including a different shield and helm, and also including some of those special bulky shoulder pads that you sometimes see with bone mold armor. Not all the time though, and there's not a whole lot more to say really, it just, kind of looks like bone mold armor. And regardless, the next armor set that we're looking at is another iron armor set, including a different helm, which really looks more like a cap, and it has a sort of different type of shield, and the last armor set in this particular corner is a variety of Doom armor. I think this is actually one of the new armor sets added in by the Symphony, and it's used as a sort of armor set used by Praetorian guards of the Imperial Legion that you can now find hanging around forts and other Imperial military installations. And over in this corner we have another set of netch leather armor, including the famous bug-eyed helm, and aesthetically speaking this is pretty much in keeping with vanilla Morrowind, not a whole lot different there. And over here we have some steel armor, utilizing the legendary sort of cross-style medieval knight helm and a large tower shield. We've already shown off this armor set once before, but it's always interesting to see it with a different helm and shield. And I know we've covered several different Imperial Legion armor sets already, but here's 3 more just for comparison's sake. As you can see, they do vary a bit, especially with regards to helms, and I believe the central armor set is Imperial Legion Templar armor, and the armor set to the right is Imperial Legion Silver armor, and the one to the left is Imperial Leather armor, if I'm not mistaken. And despite the differences, you'll notice that they pretty much all have the same sort of skirt-like armor and shoulder pads, so they're not that vastly different from one another. And over here you can see another Imperial Legion armor set with a really kind of interesting looking helm, and yes, that's actually a skull that's part of the helm. You don't really see that every day. And in the middle here we have some Royal Guard armor from Mournhold, and the shield is actually an artifact shield. It doesn't actually belong to this armor set. I just thought I'd include a few artifacts, and it's certainly a really interesting design. And of course the Symphony replaces every artifact, armor set, and also a weapon in the entire game. But anyway, going back to some Imperial Legion armor, here you can see a standard bearer armor set, including a full Empire standard with engravings in Daedric, and you can also make out the name of Morrowind as well. Clearly this is the standard of the Imperial Legion troops stationed in Morrowind, a really cool little detail there. And moving on to some non-Imperial armors, here we can see 3 different armor sets from the Tribunal expansion, including the High Ordinator's Her Hand armor set, and also the Dark Brotherhood armor set. Really, all of them look fairly similar to their vanilla counterparts, maintaining the same, sort of aesthetic-like style, with just, updated visuals. Though, as always with these armor sets, I have to say that I personally think they all just look, really good. Hedgehog 12 is really a master at making armor sets, and of course, if you used any of his better armor mods on the Nexus, you're probably already familiar with that. But anyway, moving on to our last batch of armor sets that we're going to be showing off today, keeping in mind there's still a few that we won't be showing off. Here we have yet another Imperial armor set. This one is Dragon Scale Imperial armor, if I remember correctly. And right next to it is traditional Duma armor, which looks an awful lot like, a mech suit, I suppose the original did as well, but it's just something I kind of like to note there. And you can also make out a lot of details on this suit, including the Duma axe, and I think that's a short sword maybe, on the back. Last but not least, we also have a set of glass armor here, which is actually one of my personal favorites, and the Symphony does a really outstanding job of replacing this armor set, keeping some of the Morrowind aesthetics while adding in a lot of gems to, sort of add a bit of color contrast to the armor here, including that Telvanni style bug brooch design on the chest. And it really looks like a high-end armor set, to say the least. Since we've just looked at armor sets, it only makes sense to take a look at some weapons next, and the Symphony replaces pretty much every weapon in the game with new models and textures, and also includes a few dozen new weapons as well. But again, we're not covering much of that today, but in any event, let's get started with the Daedric weapon set, which you can see on this table here. And these are some, fairly distinctive models that keep the traditional Daedric black and red coloring and overall stay true to the original versions of the game, at least in terms of size, shape, and style. But going over to the next table, we have a set of iron and steel weapons with some Duma stuff mixed in as well. But there's something I really want to point out here, since it's a pretty major feature of the Symphony, and that's the fact that every enchanted weapon, at least as far as I can tell, has a unique model. See, we have 2 different enchanted iron war axes here, an iron viper axe and an iron spark axe, and they both have unique models. And if we had a regular iron war axe here, you'd notice that it also has a unique model as well. There's also a couple of enchanted steel axes here, and they both have, once again, unique models. I've looked at a number of different enchanted weapons when doing this showcase, and as far as I can tell, the Symphony gives them all unique models, whereas in Vanilla Morrowind, they'd all, be clones of iron war axes or steel war axes or, what have you. This is kind of a major feature, hence why I'm talking about it so much, because there aren't a whole lot of comprehensive weaponry places out there that provide unique models for all enchanted weapons outside of, say, Drake Moore's mods anyway. And it's definitely a really nice feature to have. And anyway, on that table we just saw a bunch of chitin weapons with a few other assorted weapons along the edges. As you just saw, the chitin weapons are really quite artistically distinctive, really. And over on our next table here we have a bit more of a mixture of steel, silver, and iron weapons. And I have to say there's a lot of cool detailing with a lot of these weapons, like the steel claymore has some really beautiful engravings in it. And you can tell there's a lot of rust on a lot of these iron weapons. And before I forget, I've got to point out the overhaul of the iron fork. Before it was just, a regular fork. And now in the Symphony, it's basically a giant pitchfork that you can use to, start a rebellion against the upper class. And here we've got a few more weapons, including a Nordic broadsword, which has a really cool looking hilt, if I do say so myself. There's also some maces and a few short swords here, and obviously the Imperial short sword has a bit of a Gladius-inspired design about it. And I know this must be getting old by now, but I especially like the axes here, with the more reflective surfaces and engraved designs. And I almost never use axes myself, but these do tempt me a bit. And over on the next table we have some warhammers, where again you can see more of these unique models for enchanted items. Notice how we have an enchanted warhammer right next to a regular warhammer, and they look nothing alike. Again, just pointing that out because it is a really cool feature and really adds some variety to the weapons that you can find in the game. We also have a few spears and claymores here. Most of these still look vaguely similar to their vanilla counterparts, and good grief, I've really said that a lot in this video, haven't I? On this next table we have some ebony weapons, and these have largely been given a huge makeover. I mean, look at the ebony short sword here. It kind of looks like a twisted dagger, a pretty big change from vanilla Morrowind. And you can also see some Daedric writing engraved on the blade of the ebony broadsword, which is a cool little detail that you can find on the blades or hilts of a lot of these weapons. That just sort of adds to that Morrowind-like charm. Now you can also see a chitin Firebite war axe here, which notably has a unique model to it with some really superb detailing. And there's also a couple of artifact weapons on this table, such as this massive battle axe that, you know, kind of has a sort of skull-like look about it. I think it's called the Widowmaker, and it seems to have some sort of particle effect though to it as well, and you'll notice that actually with a few of the artifact weapons that you'll find in the Symphony. And you can also see the sort of white woe here, which I can't remember, but I think it may have had a generic ebony broadsword model originally, and you can tell that it clearly has a slightly different model now. And on this last table, we have our last set of weapons that we'll be looking at today, a set of glass weapons. And keep in mind that this is only a tiny fraction of the total weapon models added in by the Symphony. We have a few of these interesting glass weapons here that they all look very green, to say the least. They also have some slightly reflective surfaces, and they're just slightly translucent, and they certainly look very impressive. And we're almost done with item replaces, but I did want to spend a few minutes looking at a few of the book and document replaces added in by the Symphony, since it does replace all book art, notes, and scrolls in the game. So here you can see a bunch of books on the table here. A few of them are notably different shapes and sizes than they were in vanilla Morrowind, and it should be pointed out that most of these book covers are indeed in Russian, which may be a problem for some people. The actual books are obviously going to still be in English or whatever language your version of Morrowind is in. It's just the covers are in Russian, but moving on, in addition to the new book art, you'll also notice the actual document art when you open a book or note up is also new and replaced, like notes now appear on a sort of faded looking parchment. And regardless of the language the book covers are in, there's, you know, some pretty cool looking cover art on a few of these books that help make them stand out. And I'm not sure if you guys spotted it before, but some journals and religious texts will actually appear as bound, rolled up documents instead of, you know, just plain old books, which is sort of an interesting design. And here you can see a bunch of enchanted scrolls, and you notice they don't all look the same. In vanilla Morrowind, all enchanted scrolls were pretty much identical, but with the Symphony, they now come in a variety of different colors, usually to indicate what school of magic they belong to, such as blue for restoration, or red for destruction magic, or purple for mysticism, or anything else you can imagine. This is pretty much the same system as with the alchemy potions and the unique icons, so it's pretty much just a universal and convenient organizing difference that's really just a cool feature to have, honestly, and, you know, it does definitely add a lot of variety to the environment. And just to look at a few more books for variety's sake, here you can see a few open books and what they look like, as well as a few additional interesting book covers. And overall, the Symphony has a lot of good art in it that should prove at the very least interesting for most players and sort of encourage exploration if, you know, you've gotten tired of seeing all the same old things over and over again in vanilla Morrowind. Now finally, we're coming up to the last segment here, though it's an important one to be sure, and that's going over some of the quite frankly numerous Morrowind creatures and wildlife replaces added by the Symphony. There's quite a lot of ground to cover here, and I'm going to try and cover a little bit of everything. Obviously, we've already covered a fair amount of the dungeon creatures earlier, so we'll mostly be focusing on wildlife here, like the noble cliff racer, which you can see here, and it's been given a pretty big update, including translucent wings, which are a pretty cool effect, and it could just be my imagination, but I think cliff racers may actually be a little less aggressive in this Symphony. At least fewer of them seem to be attacking me, so, you know, that might be a small plus right there, especially if you don't like dealing with cliff racers. But going on, one of the first creatures pretty much everyone encounters in Morrowind is the mud crab, and like every creature, it's gotten a fairly big overhaul from the Symphony. Mud crabs now have a slightly larger shell, some fairly menacing pincers, and some red, almost demon-like eyes, I have to say. And as you can see here, there's also Quama Forages, which not only have updated new looks and visuals, but they also have new attack animations, and something that Quama Forages will do now is that they'll burrow into the ground and then resurface and attack you from behind, which is a cool feature, though potentially annoying for the adventurer caught unawares. And here's another staple of Morrowind wildlife, the giant rat, and as you can see here, the rat has gotten a really nice and detailed overhaul. I love all the fur and whiskers that the Symphony adds here, and as a bonus, rats are a lot more passive than they were in vanilla Morrowind, at least from what I've seen so far. I mean, notice how this rat hasn't attacked me yet despite standing so close? While in many cases the creatures in the Symphony are considerably more dangerous, a lot of the wildlife has also been made more passive, at least from what I can tell. Though, naturally, this does not include creatures of the sea, and in particular, the slaughterfish, which have gotten a major update, but sadly are not very passive. They continue to be a cliff racer-like swarm of the sea, and will definitely be a major menace. And moving on, you can see some Betty and Bull Netches here at the Dren Plantation, and besides high-quality models and textures, you'll also find they've been equipped with some purple-like particle effects, I guess, which almost, gives me the notion that mayhaps they're actually casting levitation spells. I mean, purple is a color that one typically associates with levitation, but, getting back on topic here, you also find that Bull Netches have an interesting new animation where they can seem to bring their tentacles up to their mouth, though I'm not actually sure what Netches eat exactly. Mayhaps they eat humans, I have really no idea. Either way, I thought I'd show off the Netches here at a slightly different time of day, because they do actually glow in dim lighting. They cast a sort of purple-like light, and I think they actually did that in Vanilla Morrowind 2, if I'm not mistaken. Going on to another domestic creature, here you can see the Pakwa Corki, and you'll notice that besides the obvious changes, that Corki now looks a lot more like a farmer's guar, with a platform that could be used to store baskets or harvests of grain or wheat to store or take to the market. It's certainly fitting given the farmlands that and the farmer that owns Corki here. And just to compare that pack guar to a normal guar, here you can see a wild guar out in the Ascadian Isles region, and obviously they have some fairly high resolution textures and high quality models. And really, to my mind, this fits with the guars quite perfectly. But we're not quite done with guars yet. Here's another pack guar in one of the Ashlander camps, and you'll notice how it's packed down with a bunch of baskets. This is probably how the locals transport their food and supplies. And the aesthetic of this design certainly fits in rather well with Morrowind, I think. And anyway, moving on to a few more staples of the Morrowind wildlife. Here we have the Aliot, which looks pretty similar to how it did before. I mean, there's only so much you can change with a giant walking mouth on two legs, and the Symphony has merely updated their graphical appearance with new models and textures, as you might expect. And the next creature we're going to be looking at is the classic Nyx Hound, and these do look a lot different from the traditional Morrowind Nyx Hounds, at least, in terms of coloring. These are more green and appear to have purple-like mandibles and yellow bug-like eyes. Certainly an alien combination of colors, though that's sort of in keeping with Morrowind as a whole, really. Vardenfell is supposed to be an alien-like place, and these Nyx Hounds certainly play that part rather well. And here we have one of Morrowind's only insectoid creatures, the Shulk. And I don't think I need to tell you this. It's pretty obvious how different the Shulk look in the Symphony compared to Vanilla Morrowind. And finally, the last creature we're going to be taking a look at today is the Koguti. And as with pretty much everything else, the Symphony adds some pretty high quality replaces for the Koguti that really let you see a lot of detail, like their bloodshot eyes or the rough leather of their skin. And needless to say, there's a lot of stuff I skipped over today. This is just meant to be a showcase providing you guys a basic gist of everything the Symphony does in terms of graphical overhauls. And there's a lot we haven't covered here, and you'll just have to check it out for yourself to, see everything. I have included a list of recommended graphical mods to install alongside the Symphony for the best experience down in the video description below. But real quick, I would like to remind you guys to always back up your Morrowind installation before installing a lot of graphical mods, just in case you run into some unforeseen issues. Anyway, that pretty much wraps up everything for today's showcase. I again must apologize for how long it took me to get this video released, and I'm going to try making it up to you guys with more frequent updates throughout the next rest of the month. And we should have a lot of videos coming up throughout this next week. So anyway, Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time with our next showcase episode, the Big 5-0.